I've spent more than half my life looking into the eyes of people who think they can outsmart the truth. Before I ever stood under these studio lights, I was a cop on the streets of Chicago. I spent years in interrogation rooms that smelled like stale coffee and desperation, sitting across from individuals who had committed the unthinkable and still had the nerve to look me in the face and lie. I've seen it all: murderers, predators, thieves, and cowards. And if there's one thing those years of service taught me, it's that a lie has a specific weight to it. It has a sound, a certain shift in the eyes, a stutter in the breath when the pressure starts to rise. People come onto my stage thinking they can wrap their lies in enough excuses or enough tears to make me feel sorry for them. They think that if they yell loud enough or play the victim well enough, I'll buy into their nonsense. They couldn't be more wrong. I don't have the patience for it anymore. I don't have the time for the games. When you walk into my world, you aren't just walking into a television studio. You're walking into a place where the truth is the only currency that matters. I've seen families torn apart by the most horrific circumstances, but there is something particularly disgusting about someone who uses the death of a loved one as an opportunity to line their own pockets. It's a level of betrayal that cuts deeper than almost anything else, because it's a betrayal of blood and a betrayal of someone who isn't here to defend themselves. That's what brought me here today, and that's why I'm as angry as I've ever been. This case didn't just feel like another segment. It felt like a direct assault on the concept of family. A family came to me because they are completely broken, and not just by the grief of losing their mother. They are broken by suspicion and the cold, hard realization that one of their own might be a predator. Their mother was a woman who worked her entire life, a woman who sacrificed and saved so she could leave something behind for her children and her grandchildren. She wanted to make sure they were taken care of after she was gone. It wasn't millions of dollars, but it was a significant inheritance, enough to change their lives, enough to pay for a child's education, enough to provide a safety net. When she passed, she left her daughter, Amanda, in charge. She trusted her. She gave her the keys to the kingdom, the signatures, the passwords, and the legal authority to handle the estate. Amanda was supposed to be the responsible one, the one the mother leaned on in her final days. But now, the bank accounts are bone dry. The money is gone. And while the rest of the family is struggling to pay for a headstone, Amanda's showing up in new clothes, driving a newer car, and offering nothing but vague excuses and redirected anger. I watched the pre-show interviews from my monitors in the back, and my blood was already beginning to boil. I saw Amanda sitting there with her arms crossed, looking indignant, as if she were the one being wronged. She called her siblings greedy. She said they were attacking her because they were jealous of the relationship she had with their mother. It's a classic tactic. When you're guilty, you attack the character of the people who are calling you out. But I've looked at the documents. I've seen the bank statements that the brother, Mark, managed to get his hands on. I've seen the dates of the withdrawals, and I've seen their father, Jim. Jim is a man who looks like he has the weight of the world on his shoulders. He lost his wife for 40 years, and now he's watching his children go at each other's throats. But more than that, he's looking at his daughter and seeing a stranger. He doesn't want to believe it. You can see it in the way he sags in his chair. He wants to believe that there's been a mistake, that the bank made an error, or that a man had just misplaced the funds. He wants to believe his little girl is still the person he raised. But the truth doesn't care about a father's heart. The truth is cold, and it's right there in black and white. When I walked out onto that stage today, I didn't see a grieving daughter. I saw a woman who thought she was the smartest person in the room. I saw someone who thought that because she was the one holding the checkbook, she was entitled to whatever she wanted. She looked at me when I sat down, and she didn't see a man who was going to hold her accountable. She saw an obstacle to be managed. She gave me that practiced, sad smile, the one people use when they want you to think they've been crying for days. But there was no redness in her eyes. There was no genuine sorrow. There was just the calculation of a thief who had been caught and was trying to figure out her next move. I started the confrontation the only way I know how, by going straight for the throat of the issue. I didn't want to hear about their childhood or their petty grievances from 10 years ago. I wanted to know where the money went. I asked her a simple question. Amanda, your mother left $200,000 in that account for the entire family. There is currently less than $500 left. Where is the money? The silence that followed was heavy. You could hear a pin drop in that studio. She didn't answer right away. She did what all liars do. She looked away, she adjusted her posture, and she tried to buy time. When she finally spoke, it was the same old song. She talked about administrative costs. She talked about undisclosed debts her mother supposedly had. She talked about how much she did for her mother while everyone else was busy with their own lives. She was trying to build a wall of justification around herself, trying to make it seem like she earned that money through her service as a caregiver. I let her talk for a minute. I let her dig the hole, because the more a liar talks, the more they trip over the details. She started mentioning specific repairs she made to the mother's house, repairs that her brother Mark immediately shouted down from the other side of the stage. He had the receipts. He had the proof that the work was never done, and that's when the mask started to slip. I could see the panic beginning to set in behind her eyes. She wasn't just facing her family anymore. She was facing the reality that her story was falling apart in front of a national audience. I looked at Jim, the father, and I saw him put his head in his hands. That broke my heart. A man should be able to mourn his wife in peace, not spend his final years watching his daughter steal from her own flesh and blood. I leaned in close to her the way I used to do in the interview rooms back in Chicago. I told her to look at me. I told her that if she lied to me one more time, the conversation was going to get a lot more uncomfortable. She tried to maintain the act, but the tremor in her hands gave her away. She was terrified, and she should have been, because I wasn't going to stop until every single dollar was accounted for, or until she finally admitted what she had done. This wasn't just about money. It was about the desecration of a mother's legacy. You see, Amanda, I've heard the administrative cost line before. Usually, it comes from people who think that because they're the executor of a will, they're the owner of the money. There is a massive legal and moral difference between those two things, and it's a difference you clearly chose to ignore because you were greedy. You thought that because you were the one sitting by her bedside, you were entitled to a larger slice of the pie. You felt that your siblings, who were working jobs and raising kids of their own, didn't deserve what your mother had spent her life building. I've seen this entitlement 1,000 times. It's the same justification a thief uses when they rob a convenience store. They think the world owes them something, so they take it. But you didn't rob a stranger, you robbed your own father. You robbed your own brother. And you robbed the memory of a woman who isn't here to tell you how ashamed she would be of you. Mark stood up then, and I didn't stop him. Usually, I want people to stay in their seats, but I could see the pure, unadulterated pain in his eyes. He held up a stack of papers, bank statements he'd spent weeks fighting to get. He started reading off the dates. There was a withdrawal for $5,000 on the day of their mother's funeral. $5,000. While the family was at the cemetery, while they were lowering that woman into the ground, Amanda was at an ATM or a bank teller's window, making sure she got hers. When Mark read that date out loud, the audience gasped. It's one thing to hear about money missing. It's another thing to realize the cold-blooded timing of the theft. I looked at Amanda. She didn't even flinch. She just sat there with that smug, how dare you expression on her face. She told Mark he was lying. She told him he was misinterpreting the statement. She actually had the nerve to say that the $5,000 was for funeral expenses that she paid out of pocket. That's when I hit her with the truth. I had the actual funeral home contract right there in my folder. I opened it up and read it clearly into the microphone. Amanda, the funeral was prepaid by your mother 3 years before she died. Every cent, the casket, the plot, the service, everything was covered. So, I'm going to ask you again, and if you lie this time, I'm done being nice. What did you do with that $5,000 on the day your mother was buried? The room went dead silent. This is the moment where the lie usually starts to fracture. You could see the person's brain working overtime, trying to find a new path, trying to find a version of the story that still makes them the hero or the victim. She started stuttering. She said it was for a reception. Mark yelled back that there was no reception, that they all went back to Jim's house and ate food the neighbors had brought over. Amanda's face started to turn a blotchy red. The grieving daughter act was evaporating, and the cornered rat was starting to show through. I turned my attention to Jim. Jim, I said, keeping my voice lower, out of respect for the man's dignity. Did you see any of this money? Did she offer to help with the bills? Did she show you these statements? Jim shook his head slowly. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. He said he trusted her. He said his wife always told him that Amanda was the responsible one, the one who would take care of things when they were gone. He spoke about how he's been struggling to keep up with the property taxes on the family home, the home he shared with his wife for 4 decades. He's looking at the possibility of having to sell it because there's no cushion left. Think about that for a second. This woman stole so much that her own father might lose the roof over his head, and she's sitting there in a brand new designer jacket. I asked her how much that jacket cost. She told me it was a gift. I asked her who gave it to her. She said a friend. I asked for the friend's name. She couldn't give me one. You're a liar, Amanda, I told her. I didn't say it with heat. I said it as a matter of fact. You're a thief and a liar. You saw an old man who was grieving and a brother who was distracted by his own loss, and you moved in like a predator. You cleaned out the accounts before the grass could even grow on your mother's grave. She tried to stand up then, tried to walk off the stage, but I wasn't having it. I told her to sit back down. I told her she owed it to her father to sit there and listen to what she had done. I'm not a judge. I can't put handcuffs on her and take her to jail, though. God knows I've seen people go away for a lot less than this. But I can make her sit in the discomfort of her own choices. I can make her look at the wreckage she's caused. Phase 4 of these confrontations is always the hardest to watch because it's where the realization hits the victims. Mark wasn't just angry anymore, he was devastated. He started talking about how he had planned to use his portion of the inheritance to start a college fund for his daughter Amanda's own niece. He looked at his sister and asked her, "How could you steal from your niece? How could you take her future away?" Amanda's response was the most chilling thing I heard all day. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "It wasn't your money yet. Mom wanted me to have it." That is the height of delusion. That is the kind of logic that makes me want to throw a chair across the room. The idea that a mother would leave a specific will, naming all her children, but secretly want only one of them to have everything, it's a lie that only a narcissist could believe. I looked at the bank records again. I saw a series of withdrawals made at a casino about 2 hours away from their town. These started about 6 months before the mother passed away and accelerated rapidly after the funeral, thousands of dollars at a time. I held the paper up so the camera could get a good look at it. You like to gamble, Amanda? Is that where the inheritance went? Did you bet your mother's life savings on a slot machine? Her face went pale. That was the smoking gun she didn't think I had. She didn't think I tracked the location of the withdrawals. She tried to say she was there with her mother, that her mother liked to play the slots. Mark exploded at that. He told the audience that their mother was bedridden during those months, that she couldn't even leave the house, let alone spend 8 hours in a casino. The lie was dead. It was lying there on the floor, stripped bare for everyone to see. Amanda didn't have any more excuses. She didn't have any more administrative costs to hide behind. She was a gambler who had used her dying mother's bank account as her own personal piggy bank. She had gambled away her father's security, her brother's inheritance, and her niece's future. And she did it all while pretending to be the saint of the family. I've seen a lot of bad things, but the coldness required to do that, to sit by a dying woman and plan your next trip to the casino with her money, that's a special kind of evil. I looked at those bank statements again, and I wanted to put my fist through the wall. I've seen some cold-blooded things in my time, but the dates on these withdrawals were a roadmap of betrayal. I pointed to a specific line on the paper, dated just 3 days before their mother passed away. While that poor woman was in a hospice bed, struggling for every breath, Amanda was at a high-limit slot machine 2 towns over. I looked at the timestamps. She was withdrawing $500 at 11 p.m., another $500 at 1 a.m., and another $300 at 3 a.m. Amanda, I said, and my voice was shaking with a mix of anger and pure disgust. Your mother was dying. The doctors told you she had less than 48 hours left. Your brother was at her bedside. Your father was holding her hand. Where were you? You were at a casino pulling money out of her account like it was a damn ATM at a strip club. How do you look at yourself in the mirror? How do you sit here and pretend that you were the one taking care of everything? She didn't have an answer. For the first time since she walked onto my stage, the arrogance was gone. She didn't look like a woman in control anymore. She looked like a small, hollow person who had been caught in a house of cards that was finally collapsing. She started to cry, but they weren't the tears of a grieving daughter. They were the tears of someone who realized the game was over. She tried to say she had a problem, that she was stressed and needed an escape. The addiction card, it's the last refuge of someone who has no other excuse. They want you to trade your anger for pity. They want you to see them as a victim of their own impulses rather than a predator who made a conscious choice to steal. I wasn't buying it. Don't you dare play the addiction card with me, I told her. I've worked with addicts. I've seen people lose everything to their demons. But an addict usually hits rock bottom and hurts themselves. You, you calculated this. You kept the statements hidden. You lied to your father's face every single day for months. You watched him worry about how he was going to pay for the property taxes, and you didn't say a word while you had his money, your mother's money in your purse. That's not a problem, Amanda. That's a character flaw. That's being a thief. I turned to Jim. He was weeping now, not loud, hysterical sobs, but that quiet, soul-crushing crying that comes when a parent realizes their child is someone they don't recognize. He asked her, why didn't you just tell me? If you were in trouble, if you needed help, why didn't you just come to me? That question right there, that's the heart of it. Jim would have given her anything. He would have helped her if she had been honest, but she didn't want help. She wanted the money. She wanted the thrill. She valued the pull of a lever or the turn of a card more than her father's peace of mind or her mother's legacy. This is where the moral judgment comes in, and I don't hold back. I've been told I'm too hard on people. I've been told I should be more therapeutic. But where is the therapy for Jim? Where is the therapy for Mark and his daughter who won't have that college fund? There are some things in this world that are just plain wrong, and stealing from your family while they're mourning is at the top of the list. Look at your father, I commanded her. She wouldn't do it. She kept her head down, her hair covering her face. I stood up and walked over to her, getting into her space. I needed her to feel the weight of what she'd done. Look at him, Amanda. Look at the man who raised you. Look at the man who was heartbroken because of your greed. You took more than just money. You took his trust. You took the memory of his wife's final days, and you stained it with your filth. You think you're going to walk out of here and just go back to your life? You think this is just going to blow over? I told her exactly what the reality was. I told her that she had effectively orphaned herself. She had traded her family for a few nights at a casino. I told her that if I were her brother, I'd never speak to her again. I'd make sure she never saw her niece again. Because someone who could do this to their own mother is someone you can't trust around anything you love. The audience was with me. You could feel the collective pulse of the room. It wasn't about entertainment at that point. It was about justice. People watch my show because they're tired of seeing the bad guy win. They're tired of seeing people get away with lies because everyone is too afraid to call them out. Well, I'm not afraid. I've seen the worst of humanity in the back of a squad car, and I've seen the worst of humanity on this stage. Amanda was a different kind of worse. She was the betrayal from within. I looked at Mark. He was looking at his sister with a coldness that I knew wouldn't melt for a long time, maybe never. He asked her if there was anything left, anything at all. She shook her head. $200,000 gone in less than a year, spent on flashy clothes, a car she couldn't afford, and thousands of hours in front of a machine that gave her nothing back. You're going to pay this back, I said. It wasn't a suggestion. I don't care if you have to work 3 jobs for the rest of your life. I don't care if you have to sell everything you own. You are going to find a way to make your father whole. Not because the court tells you to, though. I hope they do. But because if you have one shred of a soul left, you won't be able to sleep until you've tried to fix the damage you've caused. But looking at her, I didn't see someone who was ready to repent. I saw someone who was already wondering how she could spin this to her friends. I saw someone who was looking for the exit. That's the tragedy of people like Amanda. They don't have a bottom because they don't have a conscience. They just have a fear of being caught. And now that she was caught, she was just waiting for the pressure to stop. I sat back down next to Jim and put a hand on his shoulder. He felt frail. The stress of this has aged him 10 years and 10 months. I told him that he didn't do anything wrong. I told him that he was a good father and a good husband, and that his wife's legacy isn't defined by the money Amanda stole, but by the love he still carries for her. I wanted him to know that there was still dignity in his grief, even if his daughter had tried to strip it away. We were moving into the final moments of the show, but the tension hadn't let up. Usually, there's a sense of resolution, even if it's a sad one. But with this, there was just a sense of waste. A wasted life, a wasted inheritance, and a family that might never sit at the same table again. I've seen a lot of broken families, but this felt shattered. Like a glass that had been hit with a hammer, you can try to glue the pieces back together, but the cracks are always going to be there. You're always going to see where the blow landed. I've spent years listening to people try to justify the unjustifiable, but sitting there across from Amanda, I felt a specific kind of coldness that usually only comes from the most hardened criminals. This wasn't just a financial crime, it was a spiritual one. I looked at her, and I didn't see a daughter who made a mistake. I saw a person who had looked at her mother's death as a payday. I thought about that woman, the mother, who worked 40 years in a factory or an office, saving every nickel, skipping vacations, and wearing old clothes just so she could leave something behind. She did that out of love. She did that so her children wouldn't have to struggle the way she did. And Amanda took that lifetime of sacrifice and fed it into a machine that was designed to take it away. Let me tell you how this works in the real world, Amanda, I said, leaning forward until I was just inches from her face. In my old life, when someone stole this much money, we didn't sit around and talk about their feelings. We read them their rights. We put them in a cell. And when you steal from a grieving widower, when you steal from your own father, there's a name for that. It's called elder abuse. It's called grand larceny. You think because you had your name on the account, you're safe? You think the law doesn't care about the intent of a will? You're wrong. You've left a paper trail that a blind man could follow. You've left a trail of withdrawals that lead straight to your greed. She tried to look away, but I wouldn't let her. I wanted her to see the disgust in my eyes because I knew she wasn't seeing it in her own heart. I told her that she was the reason people don't trust their own blood anymore. She was the reason why parents have to lock up their valuables when their kids come to visit. She was a poison in that family's well. I looked at Mark and told him that he had every right to be done with her. I told him that forgiveness is a choice, and it's not a choice he has to make today. Sometimes the most moral thing you can do is cut a cancer out of your life before it spreads. Then I turned back to Jim. The man looked like he had aged a decade in the hour we'd been sitting there. I asked him what he wanted to happen next. He looked at Amanda, and for a second, I thought he might offer her another chance. That's the tragedy of being a parent. You never quite stop seeing the baby you brought home from the hospital, no matter how much of a monster they've become. But Jim surprised me. He looked at her and said, I want you to leave. I want you to go to the police station with your brother, and I want you to tell him everything. And if you don't, I'm going to be the one to sign the complaint. The audience erupted. It was a moment of pure, painful clarity. Amanda started to scream then. The victim act was gone, replaced by a snarling, ugly anger. She called her father a senile old man. She called Mark a loser. She showed her true colors, the colors of a person who only loves you as long as you're useful to them. I stood up and pointed toward the exit. I didn't say a word. I just pointed. She grabbed her bag, still yelling, still spewing venom, and marched off that stage. I watched her go, and I knew she wasn't going to the police station. She was going to run. She was going to try to hide. But you can't hide from what you've done, not when your father and brother have finally found their voices. As she disappeared behind the curtain, a heavy silence settled over the studio. It's a silence I've grown familiar with over the years. It's the sound of a family realizing that the person they loved never really existed, or at least isn't there anymore. I stayed on the stage with Jim and Mark for a long time after the cameras stopped being the focus. We sat in that quiet space, the blue lights of the set reflecting off the floor. Mark was holding his father's hand. They looked like two survivors of a shipwreck, clinging to each other because everything else had been swept away. I told Jim that we would provide him with whatever resources he needed, legal advice, counseling, help with his finances. I don't just do this for the show. I do it because I can't stand the thought of someone like Amanda winning. If I can use this platform to put a shield around a man like Jim, then I've done my job. I walked them both to the back toward the dressing rooms, and I saw the way Jim looked at the photos, on the wall photos of other families, other stories. He looked like he was wondering how he ended up as one of them. When I finally walked back out onto the empty stage to record my closing thoughts, the air felt different. It felt heavy. I looked into the lens of the camera, and I didn't see a TV show. I saw a warning. I wanted to tell everyone watching that life is short and trust is fragile. I wanted to tell them that money is just paper, but the way you treat your family is the only thing that actually stays behind when you're gone. Amanda's mother worked her whole life for that money, but her real legacy was supposed to be the love and security of her children. Amanda burned that legacy to the ground for a seat at a blackjack table. There was no happy ending here. There were no hugs, no I'm sorries, no big checks to replace what was lost. There was just a father who had lost his wife and his daughter in the same year. There was a brother who had to explain to his child why her aunt wasn't coming over for Christmas. And there was a woman out there somewhere probably already looking for her next mark, her next excuse, her next lie. I've seen a lot of things in this chair. I've seen the worst parts of the human heart exposed for the world to see. But the theft of an inheritance, the betrayal of a parent's final wishes, that's a scar that doesn't heal. It's a reminder that the people we should be able to trust the most are sometimes the ones capable of the deepest harm. I walked off that stage, took off my earpiece, and headed for my dressing room. I needed a minute of silence. I needed to shake off the feeling of that woman's greed. But most of all, I wanted to go home and call my own family, just to hear their voices, just to remind myself that there is still such a thing as loyalty in this world. Family is supposed to be your sanctuary, not your hunting ground. If you're lucky enough to have people who love you, don't ever take that for granted. And if you're thinking about taking advantage of that love, just remember there are people like me out there who are waiting to look you in the eye and tell you exactly what you are. Trust is earned, but betrayal is a choice you can never take back. The studio lights started to dim, one by one, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor where Amanda had just been standing. The crew began the practice dance of winding up cables and moving cameras, the mundane sounds of a production wrap-up clashing with the heavy, stagnant air of the betrayal we had just witnessed. I stayed in my chair for a moment, just sitting there in the semi-darkness. People think that when the cameras stop rolling, I just flip a switch and go back to being a guy who doesn't care. They think this is just a job. But you can't spend 20 years as a cop and then another decade and a half doing this without it leaving a mark on you. You can't look at a man like Jim, a man who worked his fingers to the bone to provide for his family, and see him broken by his own flesh and blood without feeling a knot of pure, unadulterated anger in your gut. That anger doesn't just go away because the director yells cut. It follows me into the dressing room. It follows me on the drive home. It stays with me because it represents a fundamental breakdown of the things I hold sacred: loyalty, honesty, and the protection of those who can't protect themselves. I've seen a lot of Amandas in my life. I've seen them in interrogation rooms, crying about how life dealt them a bad hand while the victims of their choices were lying in a morgue or sitting in a hospital. The common thread among all of them is a complete lack of accountability. They live in a world where their needs, their desires, and their problems are the only things that matter. To Amanda, that $200,000 wasn't her mother's legacy or her father's security. It was just a pile of chips on a table that she felt she had a right to play. She didn't see the sweat and the years it took to save that money. She didn't see the sacrifice. She only saw the high she got from the gamble. And when the money ran out, she didn't feel guilt. She felt the need to lie to keep the game going. That's the terrifying part about people like her. They will look you right in the eye, knowing that you know they're lying, and they will double down. They will attack you for questioning them. They will make themselves the martyr while they're holding the smoking gun. It's a sickness of the character, and there's no pill for that. I thought about Mark, the brother. He's going to have a hard road ahead of him. He's the one who's going to have to pick up the pieces. He's the one who's going to have to sit with Jim every night and convince him that he's not a failure as a father. Because that's what happens in these cases. The victims end up blaming themselves. Jim is going to spend the rest of his life wondering what he did wrong, where he failed in raising Amanda, and why she turned out this way. I wanted to tell him one more time that it wasn't his fault. You can give a child all the love and the best values in the world, but at the end of the day, they make their own choices. Amanda chose greed. She chose the casino. She chose the lie. Mark's inheritance is gone, and his daughter's college fund is a dream that's been deferred. But he still has his integrity. He still has the ability to look at himself in the mirror and know he did right by his mother. In the long run, that's worth more than the $200,000, though I know that's cold comfort when you're looking at a stack of bills you can't pay. As I walked toward the back of the studio, I saw a photo of my own family on the wall of the hallway. It hit me then the same way it hits me after every one of these shows. We think we have time. We think that the people we love will always be there and that the bonds of blood are unbreakable. But stories like this remind us how easily those bonds can be severed by a single selfish choice. If you're watching this or if you're hearing this story, don't wait for a crisis to check in on the people you love. If you're an executor of a will, remember that it's a sacred trust, not a lottery win. If you see someone in your family starting to slide into that world of lies and entitlement, don't look the other way. Don't be nice until there's nothing left to save. Confront it. Hold them accountable. Because the truth might hurt, but it's the only thing that can prevent a tragedy like the one I saw today. I'm going to go home now, and I'm going to hug my kids a little tighter. I'm going to appreciate the fact that when I look at the people in my life, I don't see a lie staring back at me. And for Jim and Mark, I hope they find some version of peace. I hope the legal system does what I can't do and holds Amanda responsible for the theft she committed. But even if she never spends a day in a cell, she's already in a prison of her own making. She's alone, she's disgraced, and she has to live with the knowledge that she sold her soul for a few losing hands at a slot machine. If you or someone you know is being taken advantage of by a family member, don't suffer in silence. Reach out for help, stand up for what's right, because the truth is the only thing that sets you free, even when it leaves you with nothing but the clothes on your back. Stay safe and take care of each other.